Pull harder, men! Drive those oars! What secrets allowed Norse warriors to survive frozen nights that would kill modern humans in hours? Recent archaeological discoveries reveal survival techniques historians never imagined. Picture 9th century Scandinavia during winter's darkest hours. Beyond the walls, blizzards howl with fury. Temperatures plunge to bone-crushing depths, burying the landscape beneath endless white. Within a dimly lit Norse dwelling, heated only by central flames, entire families settle onto wooden platforms for another night. No synthetic insulation exists, no thermostats, no electric blankets provide comfort. Yet dawn arrives, and everyone awakens alive. This wasn't mere existence. It represented survival transformed into sophisticated craft. Their techniques combined brilliant simplicity with profound knowledge of materials, thermal dynamics, and collective strength. They transformed brutal environments into protective havens capable of defeating winter's worst assaults. Stay until the conclusion to discover which engineering innovations and household strategies enabled Vikings to slumber comfortably while ice storms raged beyond their doors. Survival wasn't luck. It was engineered brilliance in every detail. What if these famous Norse structures functioned as sophisticated thermal machines rather than simple shelters? Their architecture emerged from generations of hard-won wisdom, refined by northern gales. Every element from foundation stones to roof peaks served one critical purpose: capturing and holding warmth. Consume this meal now before it cools. The aroma is magnificent. Move carefully. Don't scald your tongue. Popular imagination portrays these buildings as cavernous, wind-swept chambers. Reality differs significantly. Throughout Iceland and Greenland especially, Norse dwellings were built partially or wholly underground. This design instantly eliminated wind exposure while exploiting Earth's stable temperature as natural insulation. Walls formed the primary defense against freezing temperatures. Rather than thin wooden planking, Vikings constructed massive barriers from cut turf, sometimes reaching 5 feet thick. These turf blocks, harvested from wetland soil, were stacked in layers forming nearly impenetrable protection. Come closer, young one. Tonight's flames burn strong. The turf itself possessed remarkable characteristics. Dense root networks bound the soil firmly, while countless air pockets provided exceptional insulation. During winter, this turf layer topped with accumulated snow transformed each dwelling into a supremely insulated dugout. Roofing employed multiple layers as well. Birch bark sheets laid across wooden beams created waterproof barriers. Above the bark, 2 or 3 turf layers defended against wind and overhead cold. Site selection mattered enormously. Vikings consistently positioned longhouses so narrow end walls faced prevailing winter winds. This orientation minimized surface area exposed to icy blasts. Interior layouts divided space strategically. Flanking a central corridor, wide elevated platforms called benches provided areas for dining, working, and sleeping, raised a full meter above coldest air pooling at floor level. The structures contained virtually no windows as we conceive them. Any opening meant catastrophic heat loss. Illumination and ventilation came primarily through roof smoke holes and narrow doorways that sealed tightly. This architecture prioritized function absolutely over aesthetics. Every component minimized heat escape while maximizing internal warmth retention. The longhouse wasn't merely shelter, it was collective sanctuary. This design crystallized from centuries of experience forged through climate combat. Which modern ecological technologies were actually borrowed from ancient builders? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to Viking Insight. Are you prepared to learn the truth about their primary heat source, simultaneously salvation and silent danger? At each longhouse center, extending its full length, burned the langeld, or elongated hearth. It formed the structure's smoky, beating heart. Structurally, this differed completely from modern fireplaces. Instead, it was an extended shallow channel dug into the earthen floor. This channel's sides were neatly bordered with flat stones. These stones maintained hearth shape while accumulating heat, gradually releasing warmth into surrounding space. This hearth's length proved remarkable, stretching 10, 15, even 20 meters, nearly spanning the entire central area. Fire didn't burn at one compact location, but deliberately spread along this central axis. This represented crucial engineering for such elongated structures. Do you celebrate tonight? Eat heartily. Tomorrow's portions are secured. Here, lad, accept this bread. This extended shape matched the dwelling itself. The Norse longhouse stretched narrow and extremely long. A conventional circular hearth simply couldn't warm distant ends, leaving them frozen and uninhabitable. The langeld enabled relatively uniform heating throughout massive elongated spaces. Heat radiated along the entire length, creating an extended warm corridor. Families occupying compartments along walls received heat from the nearest fire section. This hearth type proved incredibly versatile. Primarily, it cooked food constantly. Large metal pots suspended from chains attached to ceiling beams above different fire sections, where soups and porridges simmered for hours. Nearby, on coals or special stones, flatbreads baked. Meat or fish often roasted on spits arranged along the flames. Essentially, it functioned as an enormous communal kitchen operating continuously. The gods have blessed us with this bounty. The meat is succulent. Beyond cooking, the hearth provided the sole light source in dark interiors. Windows, if present, were narrow slits sealed tightly during winter. The langeld's flames illuminated daily life, allowing people to practice crafts, mend tools, or weave during extended winter evenings. This carving echoes your father's vessel. He would approve. Fine craftsmanship, and naturally, it supplied primary heating. All household life literally revolved around this fiery strip. People sat on benches facing flames, slept with feet directed toward heat, and dried damp clothing and footwear above it. Maintaining this fire represented vital work that never ceased. It was sacred duty shared by all inhabitants. An extinguished hearth during winter equaled catastrophe, potentially meaning entire family death. The fire must never die completely, especially during extended polar darkness. Someone from the household, often women or enslaved people, constantly ensured coals smoldered in the channel. At night, they were buried under thick ash layers to smolder slowly until morning, retaining heat. At dawn, simply fanning these coals and adding dry kindling made flames surge with renewed strength. This proved far easier than creating fire from scratch each time using flint and steel. Constant burning provided stable, though minimal, household heating. Fuel was a precious resource, possibly more valuable than food itself. In forested Scandinavian regions like Norway or Sweden, this meant wood. Gathering firewood demanded hard labor year-round, requiring all men's efforts. Longhouse life meant constantly balancing two miseries: freezing in clean air or staying warm while suffocating. People chose warmth, learning to exist in perpetual semi-darkness and smoke haze. Interior walls and ceiling beams always wore thick layers of sticky, oily soot. This black coating accumulated across years and decades, eating into wood, clothing, even inhabitants' skin. Observe how deeply the carbonization penetrates here. Directly into the heartwood. Confirmed. Soot depth averages nearly 3 centimeters near the hearth. This fact receives irrefutable confirmation from archaeological discoveries. During Longhouse excavations, scientists uncover thick soot layers. Analysis of preserved wooden structures shows deep combustion product penetration into wood grain. Air in these dwellings would be considered completely unfit for breathing by current standards. Carcinogen and particle concentrations were extreme. This was the unavoidable price paid for warm survival. A Viking longhouse interior was dark space, smelling of smoke and grease. Firelight struggled, penetrating the haze. This created a special, oppressive yet lived-in atmosphere. Constant inhalation of this smoke, filled with soot and carbon monoxide, inevitably affected inhabitant health. Women spending most days near the hearth and small children were particularly vulnerable. Studies of human remains from that era frequently reveal chronic respiratory diseases. Chronic bronchitis, emphysema, and eye problems from constant smoke irritation were common. But under Ice Age conditions or simply harsh Scandinavian winters, the choice was simple. One scale held risk of future chronic lung disease. The other held quick certain death from hypothermia immediately. It was survival's price. What do you think proved more difficult, obtaining fire fuel or living in constant smoke? But flames only heated air. In the next chapter, we reveal the secret of how Vikings learned to store heat and use it for directly warming sleeping quarters. I will disclose the most closely protected secret of Viking comfort, a technology we would today call radiant floor heating or hot water bottles, implemented a millennium ago using stone and fire. A simple hearth-warmed air, but that wasn't sufficient for warming beds. The problem was obvious. An elongated fire burned in the central hall while sleeping benches or platforms occupied positions near cold exterior walls. Even if interior air was warm, wooden floors and beds remained frozen. Sleeping on such surfaces meant almost guaranteed freezing. Vikings discovered an ingenious solution using thermal inertia principles. Throughout the day, while the central hearth burned, large flat stones heated in or near it. These weren't random cobblestones, but specially selected rocks capable of retaining heat for extended periods. In the evening, when families prepared for bed, these hot stones were removed from fire. They were extracted using wooden tongs or thick leather pieces. Safety was paramount during this operation. Then, hot stones were carefully positioned in special niches or simply on earthen floors beneath wooden sleeping platforms. Heat emanating from stones slowly rose upward, warming thick floorboards, transforming icy benches into comfortable warm beds. It was simple yet incredibly effective local heating. It didn't waste energy heating entire giant air volumes. It specifically heated places where people would spend nights. There was another, more personal method. Smaller stones were also heated in the hearth. Then they were tightly wrapped in multiple thick fabric layers or old leather to prevent burns. The warmth from stones will seep through fabric, providing comfort for long, frigid nights. People took these improvised heaters straight to bed, placing them at feet or pressing against bodies. Such a stone could radiate heat for several hours, helping people fall asleep comfortably. This method required constant work and attention. It was necessary to monitor stones, heat them at proper times, and move them safely. But results were worth all effort. Hot stone technology is a striking example of how Vikings used basic physics laws to solve vital problems. They couldn't change climate, but they could tame fire, making its heat serve them even after hearth flames died down. What if everything you've learned about Vikings is incomplete? Their main treasure wasn't swords or vessels, but a material we consider commonplace today: wool. It was wool that was the strategic resource, allowing an entire civilization to survive in harsh northern climate. Wool was the currency of survival, worth more than gold. The wool of northern European sheep breeds raised by Vikings had unique properties. It consisted of two fiber types: long, durable, and water-resistant outer hair called tog, and incredibly warm, soft inner undercoat called fell. But the main secret was lanolin, a natural fat coating each fiber. Wind bites viciously tonight. This fire is true blessing. This wool lanolin made wool virtually waterproof, repelling moisture, whether rain, snow, or just dampness inside the house. Thanks to this, woolen clothing and bedding didn't get wet and continued keeping people warm even in very humid conditions. Wool processing was one of the main winter tasks, consuming all spare time. After shearing, wool was washed and sorted, separating coarse hair from soft undercoat. Then it was combed with special combs, pulling fibers in one direction, and spun into threads using hand spindles. All right, have mercy, man. The coarse outer fibers were used to make the most durable items, including sails for dracars, ropes, fishing nets, and coarse windproof rain cloaks. This material was the basis of Vikings' economy and expansion. Silver for the amber necklace. It is excessive. I will offer 2.5. This wool is perfect for sails, but for sleep and warmth, they used the soft inner undercoat fell. These threads were woven into dense, thick fabric on vertical looms. The process was slow and laborious, but results were worth it. The key fabric for survival was vadmal, a dense, heavy woolen fabric additionally fulled after weaving, beaten, and rubbed in hot water. Consequently, fibers bonded even more tightly, creating material similar to modern felt or Melton cloth. This vadmal was almost impervious to wind and had phenomenal thermal insulation properties. It became standard currency in Iceland and was used to make literally everything from trousers and jackets to blankets and bedspreads. Wool was everywhere, used to stuff pillows, make mattresses, and caulk wall cracks. Without this versatile material, life in the north would have been simply impossible. It was survival's foundation. It's amazing how much labor went into a single square meter of fabric, isn't it? But fabric alone was insufficient. In the next chapter, you will learn how Vikings turned these fabrics into multi-layered sleeping systems. A Viking sleeping place wasn't simply a bed as we understand it. It was a carefully designed multi-layered insulation system designed to maximize body heat retention. Each layer in this system performed its own unique and irreplaceable function. As previously mentioned, the basis was a wide wooden platform called a bench. Most importantly, it raised the sleeping person above earthen or stone floors. Cold air is always heavier than warm air and accumulates at the bottom. So sleeping on floors would mean freezing. The first basic layer was laid on bare bench boards. Most often straw, dry moss, heather, or fir branches were used for this. This thick elastic layer served two purposes. It served as a primitive spring mattress, and more importantly created an air cushion. Air trapped in thousands of cavities between dry stems or branches is one of the best heat insulators. This layer prevented cold from boards rising up to bodies. It also helped remove moisture secreted by sleeping persons. Processed skins were laid on top of this plant layer, most often placed fur side down. The stiff leather side created a durable and windproof barrier, while fur added another heat-insulating air layer. A layer of thick felt, or several layers of coarse vadmal, was spread over skins. This was the actual mattress, its purpose being to provide softness and completely insulate the sleeper from cold base. Only on top of this complex structure was the bed laid out as we understand it. These were sheets made of softer, but still dense woolen or linen fabric. Linen was preferred for its hygiene, but wool was warmer. The sleeper covered themselves from above. Their own outer cloak was most often used as a blanket. Viking cloaks were large rectangular pieces of very dense woolen fabric, ideal for this purpose. If it was very cold, they covered themselves with several layers, a cloak, and on top of it, another heavy woolen blanket. The principle of layering worked here too. Air trapped between fabric layers kept them warmer than a single thick blanket. This whole system turned the sleeping area into a real cocoon, designed not to heat surrounding space, but to retain minimum heat generated by the human body itself. Every element from straw to cloak was part of a unified survival strategy. What I am about to show you is essentially history's first sleeping bag. Vikings invented it a millennium before modern mountaineers. When wool alone was insufficient, they turned to the most effective insulator known to mankind: fur. Processed skins were not only valuable commodities, but also vital household items. In Scandinavian conditions, they were indispensable for protection against extreme cold, used both as clothing and as the main bedding element. Skins with long, thick fur were especially prized, used to make heavy blankets. Several such skins were sewn together to create enormous, massive blankets capable of covering several people at once. Fur has the unique ability to trap large amounts of air between its fibers. This trapped air was heated by body heat and served as an unmatched insulator. Wool worked on the same principle, but fur was often even more effective. The weight of such blankets also played a role, fitting snugly against bodies and other bedding layers. This prevented cold air from penetrating under blankets and displacing warm air. But there was a more sophisticated design mentioned in Scandinavian sagas, the hudfat. This word can be translated as leather bag or bag made of skins. In essence, it was a sleeping bag, sewn from several large skins with fur facing inward. A person would climb into this bag hole like into a cocoon. Only the head remained outside, and the neck of the bag could be tightened with a cord. It was personal refuge from cold. Even if temperature in the Longhouse dropped to almost zero, it was possible to sleep warm inside such a bag. This was especially important for those who slept alone or were traveling. Can you imagine sleeping in such a cocoon? But even the warmest skins were useless without proper clothing. In the next chapter, we will discover what Vikings actually slept in. There is a common myth that people in the Middle Ages slept without clothes, possibly due to misinterpretation of bathing traditions. For Viking-era Scandinavia, where dark, cold winters could last for months and temperature inside a longhouse barely stayed above freezing, this would have been a fatal mistake. Sleep was not rest, but continuation of hourly struggle for survival. Sleeping naked in such climate would lead to rapid hypothermia, even under thickest furs. The body simply couldn't compensate for heat loss fighting icy air penetrating from all sides. Therefore, they prepared for nighttime rest as carefully as they did for going to sea or into battle. Vikings slept in their clothes, but these weren't the same clothes worn during the day. Their daytime clothes, made of coarse wool or leather, absorbed all the day's hardships, damp from work, sweat, and melted snow that had fallen on them outside. Even if a person wasn't caught in a blizzard, ordinary physical work in the house or outside caused perspiration in smoky, humid air of a longhouse. This moisture didn't evaporate completely, but remained in fabric, turning clothing into cold, sticky compress clinging to body. Going to bed in damp clothes is the quickest, surest way to get deadly hypothermia. Moisture has tremendous thermal conductivity, drawing heat from body dozens of times faster than dry air. Sleeping in wet clothes would turn beds into icy traps. Therefore, before going to bed, there was a strict changing ritual in every home, as much a rule of hygiene and survival as washing hands before eating. Daytime clothes, damp and inevitably smelling of smoke and sweat, were carefully removed. These clothes weren't thrown away but carefully hung on special poles or ropes under ceilings as close as possible to the long hearth. Heat from fire and rising smoke slowly dried and disinfected fabric, preparing it for the next day. Instead, they put on special night clothes that never left living areas and were kept in dry, safe places. Most often personal wooden chests standing at sleeping bench heads and also serving as seats during the day. The basis of nightwear was a long shirt or surca, a versatile garment similar to a tunic worn by both men and women, long enough to cover most of the body, often reaching knees or even ankles. It was most often made of linen, although woolen versions were also available for particularly harsh conditions. Linen was preferred for underwear for several reasons. First, it was relatively soft on body after numerous washings and wear, unlike the rather prickly wool of the era. Second, linen was hygienic and wicking. On top of this basic linen shirt, if the house became particularly cold, another looser tunic was worn. Frosty nights when fire in hearth weakened towards morning required additional precautions. This second layer was almost always wool. Wool, unlike linen, has unique property. It continues warming even when absorbing certain amounts of moisture, up to 30% of its weight. This was due to wool fiber structure retaining air pockets even when wet. This combination, linen next to body to wick away moisture and wool on top for insulation, was ideal multi-layer system. A huge amount of heat, up to 30% according to modern estimates, escapes through uncovered heads. This is due to intense blood supply to brains. Vikings, being practical and attentive to their bodies, knew this well from experience. They understood that sleeping with uncovered heads in rooms where steam came from mouths was simply unwise, negating all efforts to keep bodies warm. Cold heads would cause whole bodies to freeze. Therefore, sleeping with head covering wasn't a whim or part of fashion. It was absolute universal norm, as natural as wearing shoes outside. Leaving heads uncovered meant voluntarily losing most valuable heat. It could be simple woolen caps reminiscent of modern hats, knitted or sewn from several fabric pieces. The main thing was that it fits snugly around heads, reliably covering ears, another area critical for heat loss. Sometimes, instead of separate caps, hoods were used that were part of upper tunics. Such hoods could simply be thrown over heads when going to bed, also reliably protecting necks and back of heads from drafts that could shoot through neck openings. One of simplest and most effective ways to keep warm was completely free and available to everyone. The warmth of another person. In Viking culture, focused on extended family and collectivism, sleeping together wasn't a whim, but basic survival strategy. The Longhouse was not just dwelling, but dormitory. Several generations lived under one roof. Elders, their adult married offspring, and other relatives. Individual space was luxury that no one could afford, nor did anyone seek it. The sleeping platforms or benches were not designed for one person. They were wide, 2 to 3 meters long, and stretched along entire walls. Whole families slept on these platforms side by side. The principle is simple. One body gives off certain amount of heat. Two bodies give off twice as much, but they don't lose it twice as fast because they're in contact with each other. Surface area that gives off heat into cold air is reduced. Family members went to bed together, not only social act, but also thermal necessity. People huddled together, sharing warmth. In addition, they shared bedding. It is much more effective to cover 3 or 4 people with one huge fur blanket than to cover each person separately. Under such common dome, single microclimate was created maintained by collective heat. This method was especially important for most vulnerable members of society. Although we will not go into detail, it is obvious that in such system, everyone survived together. Elderly and weak could always count on warmth of those who were healthier. This way of sleeping was the norm. There are no mentions in sagas and chronicles that this was considered uncomfortable. It was as natural as breathing or eating. Warmth generated by several bodies was key factor in survival during most severe frosts. When fire in hearth died down in morning and stones under bench cooled down, it was warmth of person sleeping next to them that kept them from freezing. Thus, the very social structure of Vikings based on extended family was directly integrated into their strategy for combating cold. They survived not as individuals, but as single warm organism. Survival in cold is not only about external insulation, but also about constant work of internal stove, human metabolism. In order for body to generate heat, it needs fuel. Vikings understood this perfectly well, and their winter diet was designed to provide body with maximum amount of slow energy. The Viking diet was high in calories, especially during winter months. Need to survive in cold required enormous energy expenditure. Diet was based on foods rich in fats and proteins, including fatty sea fish, dried and salted, as well as meat. Animal fats were not enemy, but main source of concentrated energy. Fat is long-burning fuel that breaks down slowly, releasing heat for many hours. Carbohydrates were also important, mainly whole grain porridges made from barley or rye, as well as root vegetables such as turnips, providing quick energy needed to work throughout day. Eating before bedtime played special role, almost always hot meal. Last meal of day was often thick, rich soup or hot porridge eaten just before going to bed. Hot food served two purposes. First, it physically warmed body from inside. Second, it started digestive process, which itself generates heat. Hot drinks also played important role. It wasn't always just water. Vikings drank hot herbal teas. In addition, they consumed warmed beer or ale, not the strong drink we know today, but thick, nutritious beverage, more like liquid bread. When warmed, it provided warmth and extra calories. This inner fire was as important a part of getting ready for bed as wool blanket. It was impossible to warm up in even best bed if body didn't have fuel to generate its own heat. Vikings intuitively understood that fight against cold was fought on two fronts: outside with walls, wool and fur, and inside with fatty, hot, high-calorie food. Winter in Scandinavia is not only extremely cold, but also almost 24 hours of polar darkness. Sun could not appear for weeks. This long, oppressive darkness was no less of challenge than frost. People spent long nights in closed, dimly lit space of Longhouse. Main source of light was still central hearth, providing not only warmth, but also dispelling darkness. It was time for slow, meditative activities. Men could repair their tools or carve wood or bone. Women spun wool and wove, their looms tapping rhythmically in dim light. Stretched the beast for 3 days and nights before finally... What happened then? Silence, child. Let the man finish his tale. But main activity saving people from despair was communication. Long winter evenings were time for storytelling. It was then that great sagas of gods and heroes were born and passed down from mouth to mouth. This was not just entertainment. Storytelling, singing, and shared rituals strengthened social bonds and gave people sense of community. Feeling that you were not alone in this endless darkness was a powerful psychological factor in survival. Preparing for bed was important daily ritual, not just routine but sequence of actions that gave sense of control over hostile environment. Everyone knew their role in this process. Some made sure hearth was put into night mode, coals covered with ashes so they would smolder until morning but not produce open flame. Others brought hot stones and placed them under sleeping benches. Still others checked that entrance doors were tightly closed so there would be no drafts. Every evening, beds were ritually made and blankets checked. These repetitive, meaningful actions were reassuring, giving confidence that everything had been done correctly and that night would pass safely. Peaceful sleep was only possible when every inhabitant of house was confident in reliability of their shelter. That walls would withstand wind, roof wouldn't leak, and there would be enough fire and heat until dawn. Thus, warmth in Viking house was not result of anyone's secret. It was whole system where architecture, technology, materials, food, and even social psychology worked as single coordinated mechanism. We can see that surviving winter was real art for Vikings based on deep understanding of nature. Their ice houses weren't just homes, but complex engineering systems. From multi-layered turf walls to genius idea of stone heaters, everything was designed for one purpose: keeping in precious heat. Wool was their real gold, and art of layering clothing and bedding allowed them to create individual cocoons of warmth. But main secret was power of community. They warmed each other with their body heat, proving that it was impossible to survive alone in such conditions. It was daily methodical struggle in which no detail was insignificant. Every splinter for hearth, every scrap of wool, every hot stone was contribution to common victory over cold. What other aspects of Viking or other ancient cultures would you like us to explore? Perhaps you are interested in their seafaring crafts or belief systems. Suggest your topics in comments and we will definitely make new episodes about them. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Viking Insight so you don't miss research about how our ancestors survived in a world that was much harsher than ours.